They also just absolutely hated him. Like, hated him. They hated him. They just so hate him. And I worked with Oakley and Matthew Wells because he was set to steal all their brokers. It was fundamentally for those of us who were motivated by other things other than immigration, or saying, "Look, there's a Muslim over there." It was about UK sovereignty, about national sovereignty, about a nation being able to govern itself, and that debate is going to be lost because it's now all about digital ID. It's all about Peter Thiel's agenda. It's all about Palantir owning the NHS. It's all about organizations like 38 Degrees putting up petitions in order to do personal identity harvesting because they're funded by the same organizations. It is like Soros. Soros funds Big Brother Watch. Big Brother Watch is supposed to be all about the really? Yep. So Sylvie Conlow's Big Brother Watch. Yes. Really? I have to look that up. But you feel that like it's more important in the at least, because I think those are all very key issues to like challenge the society, mainly because it means that the people who have the most influence over policy are not the people of each individual country anymore. It's the big fund.
It's pure play corporatism.
But you think...
I say I was a former capitalist.
Yeah.
Corporatist. It is... We have corporations running both... United Kingdom's the 51st state. We do what the Americans do. Sterling is pegged to the dollar. If the American interest rates goes up, the UK interest rate has to go up. We can't get out of parity with the dollar. We are essentially conjoined with the US system. It was clear, Rishi Sunak was one of the biggest investors in Moderna, for example. His hedge fund made, I don't know, hundreds of millions of dollars from the Moderna IPO. The Moderna IPO was funded, to all intents and purposes, by Operation Warp Speed. This is pure. They're running amok. They're taking us for fools. And while they're spending all of the taxpayers' money, they're not spending the taxpayers' money. They're spending debt.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we're ranting about woke.
But I think that Eric does have a very good...
And there you go. Darren. Propagation. Look at things differently. I mean, it's not that I think those issues are important. I think you've always had corporate influence in government, and it's always a problem. You've got to look.
I'm not doubting that. It's also important to have like the voice of business like represented in government, because like it does provide employment for a lot of people. You can't just like you can't just be like, oh, we don't need the businesses, because like you kind of do in a sense. Do you know what I mean?
You don't want crony capital, and I think Jeffrey's right. I mean, there is this issue of crony capitalism and political business lobbying, and that's one of the main reasons you had such an enormous spike in immigration in all the Western countries is for that reason. So I'm totally agreeing there. I think, however, this I think this is civilizational. I maybe have a different view because I've been in academia and I've seen the pressures. I've been, had multiple internal investigations and Twitter mobbings, and I've seen how people essentially just suppress their views. I think that in our cultural space, that's media, that's education, which I think is the key to schooling, the degree of indoctrination, the degree to which, you can't have an opinion if it violates that of the woke elite who control the unions. This monster just got out of control, and it's affecting the reason the trans. You take the trans issue, you're absolutely right. Very few trans people. The issue, however, is if we abandon the idea of a truth-based order, that you cannot speak the truth as you believe it. The trans is one arm of this. It's only one prong of it, and I think the race thing is a bigger part of the problem. In Canada, where I'm from, a good example is there's a set of myths that have grown around these things called residential schools, which were schools that Indigenous children were sent to, simply because everybody was said that you have to go to a school. Now, they could go to their local school. There weren't enough of them because they're very remote. Only a third of Native kids went to these schools. Actually, their survival rates were better at these schools than they were on reserves. There are a whole set of these myths, including this idea that somehow there are 215 children buried in a mass grave next to these schools. And then all of a sudden, these other claims came up. It's all bullshit. There was never a parent looking for a dead kid in school. There were no bodies found in any of these graveyards. It is a complete woke myth, but it is a woke myth that has been endorsed by the main political parties, by the mainstream media. No one has got the guts. A few people, a small number of dissidents have got the guts to call it out. My point there is simply that you can have an entire society that is denying reality because of the pressure of this making sacred of race. Making sacred of gender is another example of this. What this is all about is being super sensitive is more important than telling the truth and being able to pursue truth. And the problem with that is it cuts down free speech. It's completely counter to the Enlightenment. This whole agenda of indigenous, the land's been stolen. It's hit the indigenous weren't stewing the land up each other. It's been used to undermine countries like Australia, like New Zealand, like Canada, and the US. It's being used. They're now trying to elevate indigenous knowledge to the same standard as science, right? And trying to essentially undermine this idea of objective truth. The problem is this is an assault on objective truth and an assault in the name of hypersensitivity to so-called emotional traumas and microaggression. I think this is enormous. I think they are trying to year zero the history of countries so that they can remake it, so that they can claim that, in Henry VIII's time, you had a multicultural society, a multiracial. That way they can manipulate the past, as Orwell says, and then they can tell you anything. They teach you anything in school. So I guess I would see this as really foundational. And that if we don't protect the truth-based order, that's why the transition, it's not necessarily because, it is partly because of kids getting their breasts cut off, but it's also because of this assault on truth and then pushing us towards this Orwellian society.
I absolutely agree with you on all of the points you've made there. But I do think that the agenda is being defined by an establishment media, which is at least waning in influence. There's no question that the BBC just produces a tissue of nonsense these days, particularly in terms of news and current.
But I think that's almost the entire developed world has got to this point where people just and I was having this discussion with someone the other day actually because they were tweeting about that this is relevant and related. So they were tweeting about reform and being like because they just hit 100,000 members in the United Kingdom, right? And I asked them why they think reform has garnered so much success. Like, what is it about the rest of the parties that is driving people towards reform? And their response was, it's all conspiracy theories. It's them being crazy. It's like the right-wing media. Like, I don't agree with any of these like assessments, right? But that was basically their argument. I just thought, look, if the press were honest about more stuff, like they've self-destructed their own reputation, and in that vacuum, people will try to find something else. Like, do you think that?
I would disagree with you. I think reform has been engineered to capture that. And,
or someone was bound to stay at it.
Remember that Farage only sort of entered the return to be leader of the Reform Party at the last minute, just weeks before the general election was called. People were saying, well, he doesn't have a long enough run. He did pretty well, in terms of the increase in the vote for reform. Richard Tice, total waste of space. He wouldn't have been anywhere close.
Yeah, well, Farage is a big part. He's the most popular politician in Britain. Yeah. He's won. This is the best. He's won Journalist of the Year twice.
Yes.
No, seriously, he's voted for by the public, and he's won twice, 2 years in a row, because of his show on GB News.
Yeah, but there's a key thing in terms of the show on GB News. He's bankrolled, of course, by Sir Paul Marshall, who's the majority owner of GB News, who also owns a huge hedge fund. Sir Paul Marshall used to work for BlackRock. He's paid substantially more as a GB News presenter than he is as a parliamentary.
Isn't he disgusting? I don't think they should be allowed to have another job.
Absolutely. But the agenda is pretty much being defined by his owners. Farage is a puppet. He's a very, very competent media performer. And whatever is presented out there will be defined by syndicate.
The fact is that reform represents an opportunity, again, a corporate opportunity. I've had a bit of a disagreement. Like Majid Nawaz and I had a bit of a Twitter public spat on this issue because ironically, Majid was quite supportive of reform and actually believes definitively that Nigel Farage will be prime minister after the next general election in the United States.
There's a fair chance.
The other thing is, of course, the manipulation of the recent petition calling for a new general election.
Yeah.
Elon Musk was routinely retweeting that, complete with a photograph of Nigel Farage in the tweets. No, at one point it was getting 90 dollars.
So much about the United Kingdom's like.
Exactly. Just my final point. The Farage, of course, was schmoozing around Mar-a-Lago immediately after Trump was elected.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. With Larry Fink and the rest of them all there. So clearly, Farage is part of this new corporatist syndicate that is going to redefine the right.
You could say that he was introduced in Trump's first like election campaigns. He was like Mr. Brexit. And, you know, I think Trump loved the fact that you could bring out this like, what sounds like a very well-spoken British person, you know, to the Americans, we signed incredibly intelligent. I say we, but I think he enjoyed that. Like, so I'm always slightly skeptical of saying, okay, well, you know, they're all at the same dinner, so they're all working together because, like, you know, I feel like they could be having arguments at that dinner, like, you know, they could have just been invited and Farage thinks, oh, well, you know, I'll go and, you know, bake myself up and like raise my profile. Like I always think you can't just draw that correlation that says, you know, they're at dinner, so they were definitely working together. You know, like what was Zuckerberg went to Mar-a-Lago. It's like, of course he went to Mar-a-Lago. He's talking to the new most powerful man on the planet. Like, you know, they all.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right. I mean, I think that it's not possible necessarily just because they're, you know, Marshall might have been a blank. I mean, it could be, right? I mean, I think that case needs to be proven, but I wouldn't ipso facto think they've got an agenda to say, because, you know, I, for example,
believe me, you've always got an agenda. If you run a hedge fund, you've got an agenda and you've got portfolio.
Yeah.
My apologies.
All right. What were you going to say there before? You were going to jump in on something.
Well, then I was just going to make a quip about whether you know, does Musk actually do his Twitter account or to see if someone running it. But anyway, that's a
24/7. It literally is 24/7.
Isn't just, maybe it is just sitting there constantly. But how do you run other stuff? How do you run for a company?
I don't know. You must be a machine, but no,
a machine. Yeah.
So yeah, no. I mean, I think these are all interesting ideas. I mean, I think this question of control, right? I mean, I guess I'm more a believer in ideas as kind of viruses that get spread by individuals peer to peer. And if you catch like the woke virus, then, you know, and so it's more of a kind of COVID model where I don't necessarily think it's all driven by, say, financial interests. I mean, I think you could see that in a number of ways. So if we take support for woke or support for even the populist right or you know, it's got very little correlation with how much you look at anyway.
But I don't think Smith, if that's true, explain J.D. Vance. You know,
what do I am?
You know, he came from nowhere. He's obviously Peter Thiel's, acolyte.
He was quite famous amongst liberal journalists in 2015-16 for writing his book, Ideology. Like they fawned over him. They were like, they had him on every podcast, on every show, and they were like, oh my God, we should have read your book and then we would have understood Trumpism. And they were just like sitting there, like praising the guy. And then he comes out as Trump's VP, and all of a sudden he was like this weird, crazy guy. And I was like, but you were saying he's a genius 8 years ago. Do you run a business of any kind? Do you want 25% off up to 20 taxi rides? Well, if you sign up to Bulk Business with my promo code, that's exactly what you'll get. You don't have to use all 20 rides, and you can use it for your own business rides or for your employees. It couldn't be simpler. Follow the link in the description and use the code BB25OFF20 to get 25% off 20 taxi rides today. That's BB25OFF20. Hey everyone, thanks for making it right the way to the end of the podcast. I love that you tuned in this long. Do me a favor, hit subscribe, because 80% of you bastards are not subscribing, but you're watching my videos. See you next time.